Hey friends, Amy with Passings here. This video is called Homecoming During Shelter at Home. That may be a really odd title. It's supposed to be. We'll explore all that. We are filming today, Sunday, April 26th, 2020. Most of us are at home. Billions of people on our planet are sheltering at home. That's not true for everyone, though, and I want to acknowledge that for the beginning. So for those of us who are blessed to have a safe place that we call home, I rejoice with every single one of you in that grand abundance. For those of you who do not have a safe place to call home, whether that's because you don't have a physical shelter, whether that's because you have a physical shelter but it doesn't feel safe physically, emotionally, spiritually. Maybe you are not at home because you are in a long-term care facility. Maybe you don't feel at home because your beloved mom or spouse or dad or child or friend is at a long-term care facility, and so your home doesn't feel like home. Maybe you are working away from home because you have left, like so many medical professionals, to go to a place where you are greatly needed. Or perhaps you're a medical professional who is working where you always do, your home environment, but you're not going home because you don't want to bring illness into that home. For all of you who do not feel at home right now, please know I pray for you all the time. My prayer has always been, since I was a little girl, that everyone feels at home where they are. And we're going to talk today about how do we get there? How do we find our way home? Some of you are spending copious amounts of time in your home, but it might not seem like your home because there could be lots of people who aren't normally there, your kids maybe, or parents. Everybody's in the home together and you're used to all spending time apart and coming back home. So just the sheer crowdedness of your home might make it seem not like home to you. Also, all of those personalities might be a little new to us at one time or another. That might not make it feel like we're at home. I know lots of you might have been college students or away from family for a while, and you've come home during this shelter at home time. You may have changed, of course, during that time away. So when you come home, home doesn't feel like home to you. So I point that out to let us know that going away from home doesn't necessarily mean leaving our physical structure. And right now, a lot of us are in our physical structure, but we are not at home at all. We are not at home because we live in a world that doesn't look familiar. We don't know what that world will look like a month from now or a year from now. So even if we sit at home, our idea of home has changed. And we're doing a lot with Passings thinking about home these days, and you'll find lots and lots of resources on the website. There's a blog called Internalizing Home. There's a meditation for making home in this moment. We've got two great interviews with incredible folks, one written, one videotaped, to let us know different experiences about home, how people experiencing homelessness might teach us about home, and how a life lived in war and in refugee camps and on the streets has taught somebody, a dear friend of ours, what it is to be home. So look out for all that stuff on the website. If you're watching this far in the future, we may be on the other side of this and you may have already navigated this coming home. But for most of us, we are not yet at home and we don't know what that home is. So I've been thinking a lot about stories of homecoming, and there are so many from all times, from all places. There are two I want to share with you today, and you probably know at least one of them, if not the other. These stories both come from one of my homes, the Eastern Mediterranean. They both come from the pre-classical world originally. One is a story of great adventure for a whole group of people led by one leader. The other is a story about one individual's homecoming. But they have a lot in common, and they're both providing me with great sources of challenge when I think about what home is. They are giving me a lot of inspiration when I realize how many people have to journey home again and again, whether that's a physical home or, much more importantly, a metaphoric home. I'm going to start, before I talk about these stories, before I share them with you, I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes about home and homecoming, and it's by beloved poet T.S. Eliot. And Eliot says this: "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Just a few simple lines that really encompass what it is to be a human, what our journey is, whether that journey takes us far from a physical place where we started or an emotional place or a mental place. Our lives are filled with adventuring out, coming back, but coming back to a place that's familiar but also new because we've changed. We'll go back to that quote at the end of our talk together. So the first story I want to share with you is a great adventure story. It is a story of a Greek man named Odysseus. And it is because of this story that we have the term Odyssey. So when we use the term Odyssey, we're talking about a challenging trip, life-changing trip. That is because Odysseus was on a life-changing trip. He was a leader. He was a king in Greece, and he participated in a war in Troy. So for those of you who are geographically minded, Troy is in the land that is now Western Turkey. Odysseus is there for the whole Trojan War. It lasts about 10 years. And he has to get back to his home in Ithaca, which is on what is now the western part of Greece. So he's traveling a far distance. Much more importantly, he's traveling a far distance within himself. This story definitely was developed over time. We know it from a very long poem, the second oldest extant piece of literature we have in the West. The first is the Iliad, which tells the story of that Trojan War that he participated in. This story was written down finally in the late 8th century BCE, but it tells of events that happened 400 to 500 years before that. These events happened. We know the Trojan War happened. The events I'm going to talk about today have truth in them, whether they happened or not. He definitely had a long, adventurous ride home. So Odysseus sets out to get home after 10 years at battle. He encounters every kind of challenge you can imagine. In fact, all of the people with him are also challenged. Most of them lose their lives because of these challenges. Early on in his journey, Odysseus and his men meet a Cyclops. Cyclops is, of course, a big giant with only one eye. This one is named Polyphemus. And he's very scary, but he's not very smart. He wants to keep all of the men so that he can eat them on his island. And so he puts a lot of wonderful foods within a cave. And the men are starving. Odysseus and his fellows are starving. And so they go into the cave and they find this feast and they eat. Soon after, Polyphemus comes back into the cave and he rolls a big boulder over the entrance. And so the men cannot get out. Odysseus is very smart. That's his greatest attribute. He's wily. So he and his men figure out a way to blind Polyphemus, which is quite simple if you only have one eye. So they drive a stake into his eye and they blind him. And this giant is yelling out in pain and in agony and in fear and confusion to everyone all around. He's asked Odysseus, or whoever has done this, he's asked, who did this? And Odysseus says, nobody. So when all of the people outside of the cave hear Polyphemus cry, they say, "Who hurt you? What happened?" And he says, "Nobody hurt me." So they think nothing happened to him, so they don't come to his aid. So we've gotten rid of the danger of Polyphemus, but Odysseus and his fellows don't know how to get out of the cave. Polyphemus has a whole group of sheep in that cave with him, and at some time they have to go out. So when it's time for them to go out and he is about to roll the boulder away, Odysseus and his men strap themselves to the underbelly of the sheep. When the sheep pass by, the giant Polyphemus, he's feeling around for humans. He knows that these guys are going to try to get out. He doesn't feel any, he just feels his sheep, so they go on their way. I tell this part of the story in detail because Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon. Poseidon is the god of the sea, and Polyphemus goes to his father when he realizes what's happened, and he's furious, and he says, "Dad, you have to wreak revenge on this group of men." So Polyphemus does, or Poseidon does, and that's a big reason why we have so much adventure on the way home. Lots of adventure. There is Calypso, who is a nymph, and she kidnaps Odysseus, and he has to stay with her for 7 years. There's Circe, who is, maybe we would call her a witch today. She turns a lot of Odysseus's men to swine. Lots and lots of adventure, really challenging things to deal with. Eventually, after 10 years, Odysseus does arrive home. However, he is very worried about what he'll find there. One of his fellow kings also returned home from the Trojan War, only to be immediately killed by his wife and her new beloved. Odysseus knows this story because he's met that king when he went to Hades, which is another one of his great adventures during this 10-year journey. So he's very worried about what he'll find. He disguises himself as a beggar, and he goes to see what's happened. And what has happened is that in his absence, his little son, of course, has grown up. Telemachus, his son, is a baby when he leaves. He's 20 years old now. His wife has been being faithful to him amidst massive amounts of suitors coming. In fact, 108 is the number that's usually given. Suitors come every single day. Tell her, your husband's gone, marry me, and I'll take over the kingdom. Meanwhile, they're partying on the land. They are using up all of the goods of the kingdom. When Odysseus does come home and he disguises himself as an old beggar, those who are really true to him notice him and they recognize him, and he's welcomed back home. So that's a story of big, massive homecoming. This next story is a story of one person's homecoming that doesn't involve a lot of external adventure, but involves just as much internal adventure. And this story, also from the Eastern Mediterranean, we first know about it in writing from the Christian scriptures. It's a story that Jesus tells. It's a parable, but we know that it's a very, very old ancient Hebrew story as well. We have lots of talk about it, midrash, understandings and studies about it. So it's existed hundreds of years before Jesus tells the story. It comes around a little bit after the story of Odysseus, but same general time frame, same kind of geographic region. And this is the story of a prodigal son. There are two sons who live with their father. One is a rule follower, and he takes care to do exactly what he's supposed to do according to his family rules and according to Jewish custom. His brother, though, is not a rule follower. And his brother starts to think, my dad has all this money saved aside for us. It's the inheritance that's supposed to come to me. But why do I want to wait until I'm old to get that money? I'm young. I want to have adventures. So he asks his dad, can I have my money now? This isn't just a minor request. This is major. Because what happens in ancient Jewish culture is that one gets an inheritance when father dies. So what he's basically saying is, let's act as though you're dead already, and I'll go off and make my own way. His father agrees to this and gives him his portion of the money, and off young man goes. We don't know a lot about what happened, but lots of things are assumed. He took his money and did what anybody with a healthy body and free time and no attachments and no rules would do. He partied and partied and partied. And the story goes that after so long, he runs out of money. He eventually finds himself working on a pig farm, which is absolutely would be forbidden to someone in his culture. So again, he's broken every sort of rule. He's touching a defiled animal. He's working with them, and he finds himself in this situation, and he is thinking one day, "Oh my gosh, what have I done? I was foolish to leave my home. I was foolish to leave my family, and I squandered all my wealth. Here I am working with pigs. In my father's household, slaves are treated better than I'm treated here. So maybe I'll go home and I'll ask if I can even be a slave. I don't care. I'll go home because I know that I can have a decent life there." And that's exactly what he does. He goes home not knowing what will happen, if his father will accept him or not. When his father sees him, he is so thrilled that he says, "Oh, my beloved son, welcome back. We will throw the biggest party to welcome you home." There's one midrash, there's one commentary on the story that says that he doesn't even have to walk all the way home or travel all the way home, however far that is, probably quite a distance, different group of people to be having pigs. He doesn't have to travel that far at all to get home. This part of the story says that as soon as he turns around, his father is right there waiting for him. It's important for us in terms of home. It shows us that home is not necessarily a physical location, that home is a state of being, and it's a state of acceptance that is symbolized by his father. So back at the homestead, they're having this party, they're preparing for the party, and his brother, the one who's followed the rules all along, gets really, really angry. And he says, this is ridiculous. I followed every one of the rules. I did what I was supposed to do. You never gave me a big party. And now here, all the wonderful meat, all of the best foods, all of the best everything you're bringing out for this brother of mine who hasn't even been a part of the family. When I was young, I used to only see the side of the other brother. I used to feel that it was totally unfair. And from an early age kind of viewpoint, that is unfair. But what the father says to him, it's a totally different viewpoint. He says, "My son, I've been here all along with you. And I rejoice in you being here too. And if you were to go, I would do the exact same thing. But your brother has returned. Let us welcome him. Let us show joy in our family." These stories both have a lot of themes that can, I think, give us elements to ponder as we sit at home, as we think about a home that's to come in our planet, maybe in our own family. We don't know what our home looks like in 6 months. We don't know if the kids are still at home, if we're still working from home. We don't know how often we can get out of our home. So as we sit amidst all of these questions about what home is to us, it's important to realize that we are actually on the journey home. The themes that I want to point out about these two different homecoming stories, things that appear in lots and lots of stories of homecoming, are providing me with a lot of inspiration as I sit at home and wonder what home will look like down the road, what I will look like returning to this home down the road. One of those is that homecoming is a journey. This is something that I think we may not pay enough attention to because now we can fly anywhere quickly. In fact, we think it's a very long, torturous plane ride to get across the world from Australia to the US or vice versa. We don't pause sometimes to think how long it really should take us to get across the world because of this instantaneousness of travel. I think we get a little confused. So we might go out on a big pilgrimage, whether that's to study somewhere or visit someone or visit a really precious place, and we're back at home overnight. I think that's challenging because it doesn't give us time to really figure out who we've become while we were away and what home has become while we are away. So one thing I want to point out is just the length of time it takes to get home, and that journey should not be rushed. In our rush to feel at home, we might ignore the beauty and the changes that happen in the very homecoming itself. The second piece I want to point out is that home will have changed. When we go away, home will have changed. With Odysseus, his son obviously has grown 20 years. He's become a man, but he's not only become a man, he's become a man raised without a father. So that means that he had to learn certain things earlier than others, than his peers. He has spent much of the 10 years that Odysseus is trying to get home, he spent traveling to try to get word of his father. The amount of growth he's done through that is impossible to underestimate. So he's changed drastically. His home has changed. Obviously, now there's 108 suitors coming and people who are disrespecting his family and disrespecting his land and disrespecting his lineage are there every single night. This is not the home that he created. And Penelope, too, his wife, she is steadfast in her waiting for him. She believes he will come home. Remember, there's no phone call, there's no Zoom calls, so she doesn't have proof that he's still alive, but she knows in her heart he is. She knows he's coming home. And she's had to become really wily herself. So in his absence, he's the wily one. He's the crafty, clever thinker. In his absence, she has really developed her own cleverness. The suitors get really, really, really antsy, and they finally start charging her door and say, you have to choose one of us. And there's just so many of them, and they are so forceful. So she says, okay, I'm working on this tapestry. I'm weaving this tapestry. When I'm finished, I will decide who I will marry. So all day, she spends weaving that tapestry, and they come and they see her, and they see that's what she's doing. But every night, she unweaves what she's woven, so that she'll never have to decide to marry one of them, because in her heart, she's waiting for her husband. So she's changed as well. So even though Odysseus comes back to the home that he left, it's a different home, and the people there are different. We need to remember that, I think, that even our little ones who are at home with us every single day, they're changing, and who they are on the other side of this will be different people because of this situation will be different. So even if we never leave the confines of our physical home, it's changing around us right now because of this pandemic. With the prodigal son, this is a very a sad part of homecoming, is that the brother who is at home all along hasn't changed. He hasn't changed at all. He hasn't grown. He still finds that he thinks the world owes him something because he's worked in a certain structure, that he's paid his dues, and that he's owed something. He hasn't grown through the absence of his brother at all. So his lack of change is very sad to me. And it's a warning. It's a warning that even if we stay home and follow all the rules and do things the same, we need to allow ourselves to grow and change. The father, though, doesn't change either, and that's a beautiful thing because the father is always steadfast. That's why that portion of the story where as soon as the prodigal son turns around, the dad is right there because his love has never wavered. And his love for his other son, even as he is angry with him, his love doesn't waver. So that's a beautiful piece of not changing. So we can do both. We can decide what is in our integrity, what is our core, what's at our core. We don't have to change those things. But we can allow ourselves to grow and change so that when we come home or a beloved comes home, we also have grown. There's a change in us. There's no way we can escape the changes that will come from this pandemic. but we can continue to look to one another, to look to ourselves, and to look to these great stories of homecoming as inspiration. That there is no human alive who's lived a certain amount of years who hasn't been on an incredible journey, whether it's external out into the world or internal or both. There's no human alive who's escaped that. We are all doing that together and alone right now. This is one of the particular challenges and beauties of this time, is that we're each on one of these journeys and we're all on it together. And my feeling is that we don't know where we are. I think collectively, if we're going to put ourselves in terms of the Odyssey, we are still in the Trojan War. And certainly the folks who are battling the virus, whether it's in their body or in someone they're caring for, they're still in the Trojan War. In terms of the prodigal son, I think we're still out. We're still out doing our thing. We're not yet realizing that we're needing to go home. All of us are on this journey then together and separately. And I want to read to you another one of my favorite pieces about big journeys, both external and internal. This is by Joseph Campbell, the wonderful wisdom keeper, story collector and teller, a mythographer. This is a bit of his writing on the hero's path. And Campbell says, "We have not even to risk the adventure alone. For the heroes of all time have come before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path. And where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. And where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outwards, we shall come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world." And that's what we're finding right now, isn't it? We think we're slaying a virus, and hopefully we are. But we're also slaying so many other things inside of ourselves and inside of our culture, I hope. And where we think we are alone, we are with the whole world. Back to the Eliot piece. I'm going to read it one time as written. This is T.S. Eliot. "We shall not cease from exploration. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So now I'll say it to you as a blessing. This is my hope and this is my prayer for you. May you not cease from exploration. And at the end of all your exploring, may there be an arrival where you started. And when you arrive, may you know the place for the first time. Thank you.